We just have had the visit from Prime Minister Kishida of Japan to Washington. Overhanging that was this dispute, or possible dispute, about the Nippon Steel acquisition of U.S. Steel. Give us your views about that issue and how much of that is really legitimate policy as opposed to, and I don't say it's illegitimate, questions about politics in Pennsylvania.
Well, clearly the politics are dominant, David. This is really an example of first time we've had two presidents that are economically isolationist in their policies back to back, and they're sort of competing to try to figure out how we can add protections. Now, in the case of the steel industry, Trump put on a 25% tariff that Biden kept in place. And so you already, well, if people ask about inflation, well, that gives you a pretty good example of why steel prices were going to go up. But this case is a little different. This case is Nippon Steel, a Japanese company, wanting to come in and buy U.S. steel, frankly, invest more capital, keep the jobs, add technology, add the competition. But the steel workers, who President Biden wants to court, have resisted, along with one other U.S. company that wanted to pay about half as much for U.S. steel and have a monopoly position. So it gives you an example of the politics now that is sort of running the economic and trade policy.
Bob, let me put one more complicating factor on that, is national security. I mean, there was a time, as I understand it, where the steel industry was critical to U.S. national security, and we were very protective of that. I think that time has largely gone by as we've moved, frankly, into semiconductors, which are so much more important in defense. How do you overlay national security concerns to maybe come out in a different place when it comes to trade policy than you otherwise would?
Well, the case that you started with is an excellent example. So we've just had the Japanese prime minister come to town. He's a close ally. They're increasing their defense expenditures. We're trying to deepen the security relationship with Japan to deal with the dangers of China. But we say that the Japanese can't produce steel in the United States. Remember, this is steel produced in America. They're not going to move the plants. If you're trying to think about security, you want to have a variety of sources, but certainly you want to work with your allied partners and countries. You don't want to tell the Japanese, oh yeah, you're our security partner on military things, but we can't have you invest in America.
Bob, you wrote an op-ed piece about these issues, basically saying both President Biden and former President Trump's positions were nostalgic, was the word you used, actually. You started in government back in 1985 under George Herbert Walker Bush. You continued actually on George W. Bush. How is the economy, and particularly the role of manufacturing, different today than it was in 1985?
Yeah, that's the fundamental problem here. And let me give you a reference point as an example. In 1900, David, agriculture accounted for about 40% of American workers. Today, it's 1% to 2%, but they produce a lot more. And after World War II, for example, agricultural production increased 3 times up to today, but working hours are 80% less. So that's productivity. That's how you increase growth. That's how you increase wages, and you create more opportunities. But jobs change. So the same thing has happened to manufacturing. And it's not only in the United States. Manufacturing workers in Germany have come down about 50% over the past 25 years. In Australia, about 2/3. So it's not a surprise that you have fewer workers in the manufacturing sector. It's now about 10% of the U.S. workforce, but they're more productive. And frankly, they reflect changes in the nature of economy from 1985. But look at what people want to buy, whether it's medical services, whether it's entertainment, travel, higher technology devices. You have to keep changing the economy, but also help people adapt to it.
So, Bob, give us an insight as a policymaker, which you have been in various administrations. How do you weigh, on the one hand, volume of production and trade, and the other, value? Because what you just described is you have fewer workers, but you could have higher value things being produced and more productivity. How do you weight those two things?
Well, clearly, if each worker can produce higher value, so in like 2019, the U.S. average manufacturing worker produced about $140,000 of added value. It's telling that that was by far larger than any other country. I think Korea was about 40,000 behind. China was 100,000 behind. So that's the benefit of productivity and the benefit of growth for the workforce. Now, people might be surprised. Over the past 20 years, U.S. manufacturing exports have about doubled. And the value of our manufacturing exports exceeds that of Germany, Japan, Korea, and India combined. But we're producing different things. So we're no longer producing textiles and apparel. We're no longer producing footwear. You're producing more sophisticated equipment. That's what you would expect with a more developed economy. I mean, just think about everything in the news about AI and different sort of technology developments. In 1985, who would have considered that?
As we talk about politics, it's not a dirty word. I mean, in a democracy, that's really important. Is it inevitable that we're going to leave behind a fair number of relatively unskilled workers? There was a time that we could employ an awful lot of people with high school degrees, and they could have really living wages in manufacturing facilities. As we move to more high-scale, high-value production, do we have to leave behind the less skilled workers?
No, absolutely. That's the critical part. But, take, for example, we've added about $50 billion of subsidies we now want to have for semiconductors. Well, maybe that money would be better spent in terms of the education and skills and workforce for sort of the next sort of generation. That's the key to the politics. You need to help people adapt to change, whether it's with health cares and pension and others. But, there's this old view, which you referenced, is that the manufacturing jobs pay better. Actually, the average manufacturing jobs wages are less than the average salary for all other jobs. Now, these aren't people just all doing, sophisticated computer work. There's a variety of different types of services, and those services reflect what Americans want to buy. And so, as I said, it's not just a U.S. phenomenon. You see it all around the world. People used to be primarily farmers. Then they moved to manufacturing. Now you're going to move to sophisticated services industries. And you have to help people adapt to change. There's no doubt about that.